Hey everybody. Okay, so we're back for the next episode, and of course, I'm still here with Mandy, of course, and we are going to be finishing up. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is how I ended up with temporary sole custody. That in itself is a doozy. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about how that all worked out with everything and how we got to that point. So I'm going to let you start on this one.
Okay, so I think that at the end of the last episode, we were talking about how we tried to come to an agreement with the mother of your son so that we didn't have to go to trial and hash this thing out. And it got to the point where you'd given up a lot, actually, even though we didn't necessarily believe that to be best for your son, but at the expense of time, money, everything else, we were willing to give her the benefit of the doubt that she was going to do okay. And then all of a sudden, I spent a lot of my time working on that, and so did the other attorney. And at the last minute, the mother of your child decided that was a no-go, and that threw up red flags to me as your attorney because she fired her attorney at that point. And we remember from previous episodes and earlier in the case when she did not accept service, and we didn't have any kind of orders in place to control when you were able to have visitation, anything. Like, there was nothing in place because we'd been working for months on this agreement that ended up falling apart.
Yep.
And at that moment I set it for all kinds of things because I was like, hey, no, we're not doing this again. We're not doing this again.
If I remember correctly, you were like, I'm done. I was like,
well, I just could see what was, the chances of it going off the rails really quickly without her having, because, when both of the parties are represented, it makes the attorney's jobs a lot easier because we can just consult with each other as opposed to having to locate the other party. As when, like, if she was to be pro se, which is what happened after she fired her first attorney. Anyway, but at that point, I set it for what's called a motion for temporary orders. And because of the, we're still, dealing with COVID and everything else, it kind of set it months in advance for us to even have that hearing. But in the interim between the time that, she had fired her attorney and us getting in front of the judge to do temporary orders, multiple things happened that were very concerning. I was concerned for the safety of your child in the custody of his mother. And I think you probably share that concern. But
I mean, genuinely, I shared that concern because out of everything that was documented, video, voice, recording, and photo, everything that was documented, I mean, we documented everything from bodily scratches that were out of place, that were not normal for a child that would just accidentally get injured playing, bruised eyes, bruises, scratches, cuts, video documentation of him saying who did it, audio and video, evidence of him describing things that have happened that he is now afraid of, that also appeared for the judge that day for the temporary orders. So, I mean, now, do you want me to go on to explain like what happened in the courtroom?
We can get to that in a second, but we were still having trouble with her cooperating for visits. Like anything you can imagine, her doing, she was doing to make things very difficult for you to have, and develop a relationship with your son at that point, because it was still in repair mode because of his age and the length of time that you guys were separated through the alienation. And then, I think, we had all of our evidence together. And then right before we were to have the temporary order hearing, she pulled a doozy on you. Do you want to talk about that?
So, if I remember correctly, so like me and her had got into, a spat over like whose weekend was whose. And I was extremely dedicated at taking and keeping an exact calendar stating like, hey, we're doing this, every other week. and every other weekend. So I only get him twice a month, every other week.
Yeah.
So I'm keeping an exact calendar, like, hey, this is my weekend, this is your weekend, this is my weekend, this is your weekend, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so that way I knew I didn't do anything that would hinder me in my own case. And I had texted her and I was like, hey, tonight's my visitation. I'm going to come pick him up. And she responded with, no, it's my visitation. And I'm like, no, it's not. You've had him for X amount of weeks. This is my visitation. And we went back and forth several times. And then eventually she was like, okay, well, I'm at church with him and we're doing some stuff. So it might be really late whenever I get back to the apartment. And I remember like it was because Daniel was with me. We drove all the way down there and we stayed there until like almost like 10:30, 11 o'clock at night.
Well, and that's another thing. You were the one, like, at this point, you lived over an hour, almost 2 hours away
2 hours, yeah.
from where she was located. And you were doing all of the transportation for the visit.
I was paying the tolls, the gas, the transportation, the wear and tear on my vehicle. I mean, I was paying for everything. She wasn't paying anything for travel costs, tolls, nothing. And so, when we got down there,
this is over a year since the motion to vacate where I got on the case. So it'd been a whole year had gone by, and it wasn't from lack of action, on our end to try to get things moving. It was just a constant delay, and that whole time you'd paid for every bit of the transportation cost for visitation, and and then the week before our temporary order hearing, you go on and
so it's like,
what happened.
I went down there with Daniel and I was just like, okay, well, whenever they get out of church or whatever, then she'll be there and then I could pick him up and we're good to go. Well, we were on our way down and we were talking to I was talking to Daniel and I was just all like, she's not responding to my text message. She's not picking up the phone calls. She's not doing anything. So, she's not responding in any way, type, shape, or form. So like as I pull up to the apartment, I take pictures of my dashboard showing from the first picture that I took how many miles I started at to how many miles I ended at, from what time I started to the time it ended. I took pictures of the building number, sent them to her, showing her like, hey, I'm here, but also documenting everything, showing that like, hey, I did indeed travel, I did indeed go here, blah 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 blah. And you remember like the stack of toll receipts? Yeah. I mean, it was ridiculous. Like when the judge saw them, she was like, I'm not going through all that.
Well, and ultimately, so she denied you visitation. That it was like, I think a week.
But you remember she also said that apparently I was stalking her because I showed up too late at night and I was stalking her.
Yeah, no, it was, I don't remember all of her excuses as to why.
Well, I just remember like when we finally did get to court that week, I remember driving home that night without my kid. And I'm like, oh, this is not going to play out well next week at court.
And that's, I was like, she just, I don't remember what I said to you, but I was like,
I remember what you said. I'm just not going to say it. Like, I remember sitting there going like, nail in the coffin. Like, I mean.
Yeah. And so then we had our hearing for temporary orders, and we presented, the evidence that we had, and the judge saw it our way and gave you full temporary custody. And I remember you had a courtroom of supporters in there, and I think you were the only one that didn't hear that you.
I was completely oblivious.
You checked out by that point.
It's a thing that happens like when what was it, a quote that I came up with a long time ago that said there's nothing worse than seeing your abuser pretend to be the abused, which is abuse in itself. So like, as I'm sitting there and I'm listening to everything that's happening, I remember the judge telling her like, church is not an excuse to withhold visitation. Like, father's visitation trumps church. Like, I'm sorry, like this is how it works. And then after she granted the temporary orders, I was just like, what are we doing? What's going on? Where are we going? huh? And then as soon as we got in there, I was just like, okay, so what are we doing now? And my mom was just like, you got temporary sole custody. And I had a breakdown. Daniel had a breakdown. Jillian had a breakdown. Mom had a breakdown. We were all like, okay, like it felt like for a brief moment, like the nightmare was over. But then we still had to get final orders too. Like,
Right.
so
Yeah, you know, in a way, it was a little bit of you know, relief from
mm,
everything that you had been through. It was a little more light at the end of the tunnel, but there was still a lot to do because she was not. We knew,
complying.
yeah, I was worried about her complying with the orders, which, you know, gave you most of it did still allow her to have visits, but you were able to have more overnights a week than she
Yeah,
did.
the judge decided on um
I think it was 4-3, wasn't it?
yeah, it was 3 to 4. So I had him for 4 nights.
Mm-hmm.
She had him for 3 nights. And how it looked was I would pick him up every Wednesday and he would stay with me until Sunday night. And then I would take him home. So I'd have him Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then Sunday he would go home. And, you know, and then it was like the polar opposite. Like I was getting accused of taking him from her. And I'm like, no, 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 you're not understanding like what's happening here. Like you're not understanding the dynamic of what it like transpired at court and what your behavior has done. So
Yeah, well, and she still, even though the judge was pretty explicit as to why she was granting you sole custody,
mhm.
she still thought it was because she didn't get a chance to speak, or she didn't have an attorney,
Yeah.
or because at this time she was unrepresented
or
because she
she
had
was
fired hers.
or she was accusing me of lying.
Well, yeah,
Like
you know, she still, it was like it wasn't sinking in, you know, the you know, heaviness or the impact of her actions.
yeah.
There was still no, this is my, I'm doing something wrong, this is my responsibility. It was, you're still the enemy, you're still the one trying to.
And a lot of deflection.
And yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
because you would, over time, like in the text messages, like you would see that she would say something to me like I'm the one that did it, but she
Mhm.
was the one that actually did it. And it was
Yeah.
like, why are you deflecting your problems off onto me? Like I didn't do anything.
There was a pattern.
Yeah.
You know, because I was able to, because at that point the judge ordered for you guys to share that parenting app where all communications were supposed to go through
Yep.
that. I think it was Parenting Wizard or Family
Talking Parents.
Talking
Yeah,
Parents.
but she refused to even use it.
Okay.
Like, it was like, we have to use this app. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, at one point in time, I was just like, this is ridiculous. I have to pay $10 a month to use this app. But then I'm just like, well, that's what the court orders are, so I'm gonna have to do it anyways. And then she didn't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have to constantly remind her, I'm not responding to your text messages via text message. You have to respond to me on the app. And then she used that as a tool to basically say that things were so confusing because it was like, well, I don't know what, like he's saying one thing on this and then he's saying another thing on this. And it's like, we're using the same application, right? Because you're acting like I'm telling you one thing in text message and then I'm telling you another on the app when I'm only using the app, which made things more difficult because it was confusing even for me because I'm like, what is she even talking about? Yeah.
Right. Like,
yeah.
Which conversation is she picking up on, or which one she's making up in her head?
And then like sometimes she would send like huge paragraphs and everything, and a lot of it was just like, she's not making any sense. Like I remember several times you were like, she's not making any sense, don't respond. Like, don't respond. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. And then after we got, you know, temporary orders, I immediately set it for trial at that point, to try to expedite the process. And she hired another attorney.
Yep.
Quickly after that, and reached out to me, and they did discovery, which is a very lengthy process. And I don't know if you want to go into some of the questions that.
You see the smile on my face.
Okay, so, you know, for those of you that don't know what discovery is, it's basically where you are served with paperwork that basically demands that you answer questions, you know, as if truthful, as if they were, you know, under oath, basically, And then you have to provide a bunch of documents and things like that. But it's all part of the pre-trial stuff that you go through when you're in a legal case right before you go to trial, to get evidence and to know kind of where you stand with the facts of the case versus what your client's telling you. And we received those from her new attorney. And me personally, I have a son that's transgender, and so I ended up getting triggered by them because I thought, A, they were unprofessional, but that was, that's a whole nother thing. But B, you could tell the level of deception that, the mother of your child went into that attorney's office with, and all the lies that she told. I don't know how specific you want to go, but there were some questions about hormone therapy. And do you want to speak on those?
I'm going to touch on this one. So interrogatory. What is the definition of interrogatory?
Interrogatories.
Yeah.
It's a question. You're interrogating, basically. So it's interrogate. I'm going to ask you this question and you have to answer it truthfully.
Yeah. So this one right here for interrogatory 10 was: state every date where you have dressed in drag in front of the minor child. So this question implies that it is, quote unquote, a problem for me to live my authentic identity in front of our child. So this goes all the way back to one of our previous episodes where I'm sitting here talking about, hey, I lost my identity because a family did not appreciate this, and I had to mold myself in a manner to secure my place in my child's life. And then here she is, several years later, suddenly going like, weaponizing the fact that I'm trans and that I did drag performances,
even though you were very much trans whenever you guys were together, and whenever you had decided to have a child.
And then, I mean, like, there's other ones, like such things like, accusing me of like consuming illegal substances and stuff like that, which obviously is,
those are standard.
Yeah, those are standard. Now I'm trying to find the one that you were talking about. Oh yeah, she accused me of having schizophrenia.
Okay.
That is not a thing.
Right.
So I'm trying to see.
I think it pretty much said that you had communicated to her that you planned on encouraging y'all's son to basically be trans.
Yeah.
And you were going. What was the actual question?
So that's what I'm trying to find.
But the gist of it was that it was that you were going to put him on puberty suppression hormones or treatment. I don't know what the phrasing was.
So she wanted
puberty suppressors, right?
Puberty blockers.
Puberty blockers. To me, and I was just like appalled because, first of all, no, I knew, I knew you had no intentions or desires or.
So, and let me point this out real quick, is that like when I first found out that I was going to be a parent, I was terrified because of the person that I was having my child with. But at the same time, the first thought that happened in my head is, I hope I'm having a boy. I hope I'm having a boy. And even now with my husband that is how many weeks pregnant? 35 weeks pregnant. When I found out that we were having a boy, hello, I'm extremely ecstatic. So why would, I want to suppress my child's development all under the impression that he may be trans?
Well, I mean, you were like you said, like the fact that you're trans was being used, there was an attempt to use it as a weapon in your case, against you in this case. And, for the attorney to go along with it, I was very surprised with, but like, again, she was a young attorney and we spoke about that afterwards. But, we answered it and we gave it right back to them. And ultimately, they ended up getting out of the case because, she stopped communicating with them and paying them and all of that. But by that time we were already set for trial and we were full steam ahead. And, we still had a lot of concerns, I think, with abuse. And, I know I called DHS a few times because, I have a legal responsibility to report child abuse when I see it, and I think that they agreed. There's a pretty high threshold there for to substantiate abuse allegations. But there was record of those calls that we made.
So
Go ahead.
thing I do want to point out is, so requests for omissions, one, admit that joint custody of the minor child should be awarded to the defendant. So this was problematic to me, and here's why. We offered joint custody.
Okay, so what happened is, in our original offering, when we were working with the previous attorney before we went to our temporary orders, is we had offered joint custody. We offered joint custody, I think, even after our temporary orders, and then we started seeing a lot more abuse concerns. And that's when I was like, no, joint custody is off the table. And I communicated, I think it was probably, I think, 3 months before she fired the other attorney fired her. So
here's another one. This is request for omissions 5. Admit that you own female clothes and dress for the male minor child. So this question literally implies that I'm dressing intentionally for his entertainment.
Oh, I thought it was, I'm trying to remember. I thought it was that you were putting him in female clothes.
No. It says admit that you own female clothes and dress for the male minor child.
Yeah, I don't know. That's not even a clear question.
No, it's not. Yeah. But it implied that I was dressing for his entertainment.
Yeah, I didn't take it that way, but I answered it in some way, but I ended up making her feel bad, I think, in our answers, because by the time she got it, and there was like 40 pages of answers, she was like, oh.
Here was the one that we were talking about. It's request for omission 6. Admit that you discussed with the defendant that the minor child could be transgender.
Right. Okay.
And I'm sitting here going, like, at this point, he's only 3 months old before you took him. There's no signs of that.
No. It was just kind of, like I said, I think it was just being used as, it was an attempt to create a bias against you for being transgender, and it just didn't hold it.
No, it didn't. And if anything, and that's the crazy part, is for like my son's mom to identify as lesbian, bi, non-binary, whatever, that's troubling in itself, because it says there that she's grasping at straws.
It was,
I
don't know where it came from, but it made me very angry. Simply, because I was like, this is discrimination.
Yeah, no, because when you called me and you told me what was happening, my first thought was like, I'm gonna have a panic attack.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, this can't be real life. Like, you're dragging my authentic self
again, getting really raked over the coals.
Yeah. So whenever I say, like, my identity was literally taken from me as a result of my relationship and their parent, and then now you're full-fledged seeing omissions of it in discovery of everything that I'm talking about, is like, that's the evidence right there of what I'm talking about. Like, they tried to use this against me, and here they are physically now doing it in a legal sense.
Yeah, it was like, I was so fired up, and that's why I was like, no, we're going to trial, because I was like, this is ridiculous. And we did, and it was, what was the day of trial?
Oh, but don't forget the guardian ad litem.
Okay, right. Okay, so the one good thing that happened with the attorney that your son's mom hired second was that she said, we need a guardian ad litem in this case. And if you don't know what a guardian ad litem is, it stands for, or guardian ad litem, but it's an attorney that is paid for by the parties, but it's there to interview all the parties, interview anybody, like the teachers, counselors, whatever, and then they form an opinion based on what they believe to be in the child's best interest, and then they provide that opinion to the court, and they write a report. Basically, it's called a GAL report. And at the time, the guardian ad litem, they charge a retainer fee, and you didn't have the retainer fee, but you ended up using your income tax return.
Yeah,
to pay,
that was the thing that was difficult, because it was like, I was struggling to keep my promise to you to pay you, and with everything going on, and then like moving the whole
No,
thing
it
was
was
just crazy.
it was a whole
So-
lot of money at the time
Yeah.
for us to like, when there was no reason for it, because it was such a, I guess it was such a frustrating case for me,
Yep.
and then to have that on top of it, and I'm looking at you like,
Well, and then
okay, but it ended up being a good thing. You know,
Yeah,
our
it
GAL was
did.
awesome. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna say her name, but she ended up being incredible.
Yeah, no, she was
And
great at her job.
You were the first one. Like you paid it. You got your appointment set.
Oh,
I
paid
Yeah.
her the same day that
Yeah.
she was like, "I'll do it," and I was like, "Okay, you're paid."
She never even, Malachi's mom
Yeah.
never even contacted her.
Oh, and keep in mind, like the retainer was $2,000 for this person, and I paid $1,000, and my son's mom was supposed to pay another $1,000. And keep this in mind, she also wanted.
Yeah, it was her.
She applied for.
Well, we had to go to court for it because
Yeah.
in order to get a GAL on the case, you have to file a motion for a GAL to be appointed.
Yep.
And that's actually something that the judge has to order. And so I was arguing against it because I was like, I was like, this case is ridiculous. Like there's no reason for this. Mostly to protect your friend, because I knew you were restrained. But like I said, I argued against it, and then it was on their request. It got granted. You were the only one that cooperated with the GAL.
Oh yeah, no, I did it instantly.
And Malachi's mom never did. But like I said, it all worked out to in our favor.
But I mean, that wasn't the only time. She acted like she was cooperating, but she also failed at mediation every time too.
We tried. Yeah. Oh yeah. She tried to get us to set mediation,
So it was like,
and then she no-showed the interaction.
Well, she kept saying like, "We need to go to mediation. We need to go to mediation," and I'm like, mediation's not going to work if you're not going to call and do your interview and then show up.
There's like a screening interview, intake interview that she failed to do, I think twice. Anyway, long story short, well, actually, it's not a short story at all, and there's no way to make it short.
Okay, so we're going to come right back to this in the next episode. We got 3 minutes left to film, and we are getting into the nitty-gritty of everything whenever it comes up to trial. And I do want to have a full-length video to talk about that, and I don't want to half-ass it. So other than that, we will see you guys in the next video. I hope you guys have a very heavenly day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.